Good day, my friends. My son is currently reading a book called God's Smuggler. It's an incredible book. It's sold over 10 million copies worldwide. And it's about a man, Brother Andrew, who smuggled Bibles into Russia behind the Iron Curtain back probably in the 50s or 60s. And Matt today was telling me just a couple of stories about how they completely rely on God for providing things, and they stand in faith and believe that he will act, and he does. And he told me two little stories about God's provision today. So one was that they held a mission in Scotland, and they were having a tea party, and certain people were invited along to this mission. And at the end of the day, they just got through. God had provided everything they needed, but they were completely broke. And one of the members stood up and said, "This has been so good. Let's do it again next week." And the others were kind of horrified because they'd got nothing to have a tea party with. However, on the way out, some of the people said, "Yes, we'll come next week." And then one said, "I'll bring the sugar." And another one said, "I'll bring some tea." And so on. But they still were short of cups, and they were short of a cake. They thought, you can't have a tea party in England or in Scotland and not have cake. And so they said God would provide, and they waited all week for God to provide this cake. Now, the kind of training they were given a £1 note at the beginning of the week, and they were told that it had to last all week, and at the end of the week they had to bring the £1 note back. And you think, what's the purpose of that? Well, the purpose of it was they could be tempted to spend that £1, but they shouldn't, because they had to rely completely on God's provision. And I think the £1 note was there simply to tempt them to spend it. And so they went all week. And where could they get a cake? Where could they get a cake? They couldn't think, but they just kept relying and praying to God. And by the end of the week, Brother Andrew, he'd stayed previously with some lodging, and the landlords had written to him and said, "How are you getting on in your mission? And we thought we'd send you a gift." And there was the cake on the very last day. And so they could hold the tea party. On another occasion, he talked about needing just a shilling to send off his visa papers so that he could go to Russia. And so all he needed was a shilling. And he went into the office one day, and there was a cash tin in there, and it had loose change in, and there was a shilling. But he thought, no, I can't take it from there. That wouldn't be right. And he had this idea that God was a king, and he would provide in a royal manner. And he thought to take one of the shillings out of that tin would not be provision in a royal manner. So he didn't take it. And then one night, he had a deadline, of course, to get these visa papers off. And one night, just before the deadline, he was walking back the street, and he was so desperate, he started looking in the gutter for loose change as he walked along. But then again, he thought, no, I mustn't do that, because God will provide in a royal manner. And the next day, he was sat outside of his mission, and this was the final day, and a beggar came and asked for some funds to eat, but he had nothing to give him. And so they sat and they chatted. And as he chatted, he looked down on the ground, and there was a shilling. And he thought, he was tempted to take the shilling, but he thought, no, I can't, because this beggar wants something for food. And he thought, this isn't the royal manner in which God provides. So he took the shilling off the ground and he gave it to the beggar. And the beggar was so happy, and he ran off to get something to eat. On the final day, of course, he got the provision, the shilling. Someone sent him money through the post in a royal manner, the royal post. And he got the provision that he needed. But this is how they operated. completely dependent upon God, standing in faith. And I just thought those lovely little stories. God bless.